All right, so this is session 3, and we're going to start by kind of going through some general reading passage strategies for you. Some of these you may be familiar with from school. I'm not going to read my document in verbatim for you because I'm sending it to you, and you can do that in your own study time. But we are kind of going to go over the general gist of what this document is and how best to approach a reading passage. So they're often like they're very general reading strategies that are recommended for reading tests on in terms of comprehension, in terms of understanding text complexity, which are all elements that you should be a little bit familiar with, at least from your reading for the last few weeks that you've been doing about the reading test, is that it's dealing with things like text complexity. um, if you're not familiar with any of these terms, please do the reading, or ask me if you still don't understand the concepts addressed in the book, okay? Because I'm not going to go into all of the reading passages, because that's more for your information and to help you kind of get a foundation for the exam. All right, so some kind of basic strategies that you've probably heard of are things like SQ3R or RipRap. So SQ3R, survey, question, read, recite, review. There's a link in here. I'm not going to actually go over this particular strategy because I think it's one that most students learn in school. If you haven't learned it, the Khan Academy has a great set of resources that kind of walk you through how to do it, and how to approach an SAT passage in particular with it. So RipRap is kind of two strategies that they put together. So rephrase if possible, or read around and predict. Those are both what those acronyms kind of stand for. Skim reading, scanning are two very crucial reading strategies for just general reading comprehension. However, so all of these kinds of strategies kind of preclude they require you to understand that you have enough time to read everything in depth, which is not necessarily the case for most students on the SAT. For the SAT, you need to be reading quickly. You need to be reading only really the essential information that you need to answer the questions. To that end, the reading strategy that I have, that we're going to go over in a few minutes, kind of outlines that for you of how you would do that and how you would approach it. You still do need to try to read the passage fully at least once, but we'll get into that. Okay. Um, you can definitely choose to use any of these types of strategies or any other ones that you're familiar with. And we'll go over, I'll add a few more here and there as we proceed, but I didn't want to overwhelm you today because there's so much information we're going to go over right now. Okay, so you can definitely use these if they work for you, but they're not going to work for everyone. And they're not, I honestly, if you stick to the strategies that I've outlined in this document for just a general approach to the reading test, you're going to go far. Okay. Do we have any questions so far? No? Okay. All right. So I think we're still missing a few more people, but they will kind of come in as they can. Okay. Generally, the types of reading strategies that you learn about in school are not necessarily the best for using in a time testing environment. In a time testing environment, things like skim reading and scanning can be adapted for that. That's usually kind of a good strategy, but that's usually part of what you do to prepare yourself as you do a more complex, in-depth reading of a text or a passage. So in that case, you don't really have the luxury of, like in the case of the SAT, you don't really have the luxury of time. You have about 12 minutes to kind of read through each passage, including if it's a paired passage. So you are even down to less time with that. But it's manageable if you follow these strategies. Okay. For more information about kind of general reading strategies, I have some kind of academic links for you. One is from Dartmouth University. And then you have Princeton. They have active reading strategies. These ones, I even recommend the last one here from Prep Scholar, because they have a lot of great information about, and maybe I'll go over that a little bit with you later today. But they have a lot of great information in terms of suggestions on how best to kind of achieve a high score, or to how best to kind of refine your strategy for approaching a particular, like the reading test, and the writing and language test. So it's a great resource. Check it out. Okay, so these other links that I have here on the page that you should be seeing are really, they're again from a few different universities, which include kind of some general reading strategies that you can use to help kind of with your regular studies. Okay, so these aren't necessarily strategies that you have the luxury of time to employ in the SAT, but they are some kind of good general advice in terms of how to approach college reading, as well as how to approach how you should be working, like strategies you should be starting to use in your everyday high school kind of career. Okay. Next, we have reading test and content structure. Okay, or content and structure. Okay, so the evidence-based reading test focuses on a series of passages. So you basically have, I believe it's 4 passages that are single and another one that's paired. So basically, you have 65 minutes for the 52 questions, which we've said before. So that's roughly 1 minute and 15 seconds per question, including passage reading time. I honestly recommend trying to aim for 12 minutes per passage, in order to give yourself a few minutes at the end to be able to review and deal with any ones that you had questions on that you needed to review and you were kind of just trying to get an answer so you could finish and then come back. The word count tends to be between 500 and 750 words. Typically the single passages are longer, but sometimes you might have a shorter passage for the paired passages to kind of combine them. All in all, the 4 single passages and the paired passages account for about 3,250 words, or 3,250 words in total, is what I mean. Okay. So really, in reality, it's not that much reading, but it can seem like a lot, okay? All right, so the types of passage, the reading test will always include things from classical or contemporary work of US or world literature, one passage or pair of passages from either US founding document, so things like from the founding fathers or other historical things, works, essays, treatises, etc. You have text in the global conversation. So those are things like speeches or from like things related to social studies, cultural movements, history, like all of the kinds of things that you would see in your social studies class. Those tend to be the kinds of things that you see that are humanities kind of related, that you're dealing with. One passage on social science topics, so those are things like psychology, economics, sociology. So you're always going to see 2 science passages. So that's either one passage and one passage pair. So that, or they're going to be essentially looking at foundational concepts or recent developments in science. So they could be things you're familiar with from your classes, but they could also be kind of new information or new research that just came out that they're trying to talk to you about. You may also see kind of in the sort of humanities or social science section things related to career. They tend to like to integrate those kinds of discussions about kind of particular career paths for you, since you are you're going into college and then presumably entering a career afterwards. Okay. So that's in terms of the content, the subject matter that is actually addressed in each of the passages. But 2 of the passages are always going to include infographics. which you should all know this from your reading. So those are infographics or things like charts, tables. They could even be like maps or different things like that. Okay. And you will always, if there's an infographic, you will always have a series of questions that will assess your skill in identifying and analyzing the information in the graphics, as well as integrating or synthesizing that information with ideas expressed in the text. So kind of clue into yourself, like into focus mode when you kind of see any infographics in the text or in the related question passages. Okay, so that means you have to pay attention and that they're going to try to trick you with their wording or their placement of kind of the keys or other kind of relevant material. Okay, so the order in which you approach, the reason why I'm kind of going over this is because we're going to talk about your approach to what approach best works for you. Okay, so there's a reason for all of that kind of preface that I was just going through. So the order in which you approach the passages should vary based on your personal strengths in the subject areas addressed in the reading test. So those subject areas, again, are all of these, the different types of passages, the subject matter that's covered, okay? So what I want you to do, what you're going to be doing this week and even today, I want you to start thinking about it. I want every student to start identifying the order in which you will do the passages. You do not need to do them in order that they're listed. You can do them in order of your strengths. You just need to be mindful of where you're answering on your answer sheet, okay? So basically, this means that like if you it's based on the subject matter. So if you're more comfortable with literature or social science, then by all means start with those. But if you hate science passages or always do really poorly on them, or struggle with those sections and science is hard for you, and you're going into like a completely different career, so it's not really relevant to your college work, then save those sections for last. And this way you can focus your energy on the sections in which you perform the best and can stress less about any section in which you struggle. Okay. The name of the game is to make this as easy as possible. Okay. And as painless as possible. Okay. You're still going to be completing all of the different sections, but your strategy is going to adapt or change depending on the ones that are more difficult for you or easier for you. Okay. So everyone, I want you to be able to create a numerical order of like, this is the one I'm going to tackle first. So I'm going to tackle literature. If you want to do them all in order, literature, history, social science, science, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's fine. You can also just say, if there's a science passage, I'm amazing at science, I'm going to start right off with those. So I'm going to look for the 2 science passages because there's always going to be 2. And then the rest of them are usually single. There's only one of them, unless there's like a paired passage. Okay, so does that make sense to everyone? Any questions so far? No questions? Okay, great. All right, so once you've determined your preferred order of passages, I want you to assess your timing on each of these. Timing is critical on this exam. So I want you to complete each passage or paired passage within the 12-minute time allotment for the reading test, okay? So that means every single passage, you have a timer and you have a watch. You're going to be monitoring the watch to kind of gauge your overall time. And then for the section, which you have, I believe, 65 minutes for the reading passage, okay, for the reading test in the whole. You have 12 minutes per passage. I want you to be able to do it like clockwork. So this takes practice. You're not going to get it the first time or the first few times, which you've probably seen from the first few practice tests that we've done. That's okay. The key is to keep practicing. Keep trying to stick to a time frame. And if you're still struggling, because a lot of students may find that they struggle in certain sections or run out of stamina for the last section or just continue running out of time. That can happen, especially if you're not a very quick reader. Then then we can talk about different strategies that you can use, okay, that you can use to adapt so that you can be able to focus on answering questions, because the name of the game is answering the questions based on the passages, right? Okay, so for every student who basically should be able to, in that 12 minutes, read a passage in 12 minutes and be able to complete all of the passages, including the paired passages. And that means reading it at least once and still having time for the questions. Okay, so the key is kind of to start strong and strong. Pacing again is critical. So timing yourself in the passage is essential. This is something you cannot skip with your homework. Anytime you want to try to simulate the testing process as closely as possible to the kind of testing conditions, because the more you practice it, the easier and more relaxed you're going to be on test day. Okay. Consistency is also crucial. So if you do really well in one passage, maybe you got a bunch of like really easy passages for you in that particular test, because the difficulty of the texts that you see is going to vary, and even if the subject matter is going to vary. So maybe they were talking about a subject that you found that you're passionate about, that you know you're knowledgeable about, so it was an easy kind of section for you or exam for part of the test for you, which is not going to be the case for everything. So you want to be able to try to create a consistent pattern of practice where you are pacing yourself by timing yourself 12 minutes and say, I've got to stick to this time. I've got to make sure that I know, like clockwork, because you're not going to have the luxury of a timer in class. I mean, when you go and take the exam. So you really want to be familiar with that duration of time so that you know about how much time has passed, and you can confirm that with the clock that'll be in the room with you. Okay. Honestly, the more time you devote to SAT prep, the better. So long as that time is constructive. So if you're just plugging away at things and not correcting your mistakes, not in like doing the reading to figure out why you're making mistakes or where you're making them, or actually going and doing, being productive essentially with your and proactive with your study, then you're not going to do well. You need to be able to be constructive, like be effective and efficient with your practices, and actually be engaged with your study. So it's not just something that you can say, I'm just going to go A, B, C, D for all of them and kind of fly through it. And you can't do that. You need to consciously be interacting with the test in order to outsmart it. Okay. So the key is to study as often as you can, but don't do it to the point that you're so exhausted that you can't make it through the test. You need to build your stamina up gradually. And that takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes dedication. Okay. All right. So moving on. So some students may find the paired passages the most difficult. If that's the case, regardless of what subject it is, you can save it for last and tackle it at the end. So you want to focus, like, don't worry about it as much. You can focus on answering questions that you know how to answer, which we're going to get into, and you can focus on getting the passages correct for the other sections, for the single passages where you are probably stronger. Okay. I apologize if anyone heard my cat. I have two, and one of them decided to make herself known. So my apologies. Okay. All right. The kind of dealing with online tutoring. Okay, so here we go. So you can focus on answering either the easier questions on the paired passages if they're a struggle for you. And then do your best to answer the harder ones using things like techniques like process of elimination, which was a technique I think all of you are kind of familiar with from just general schooling. But process of elimination essentially helps you narrow your choices based so you can make an educated guess. And you want to make as an informed guess as possible, because that's going to increase your chances to getting it right. You really want to try to avoid having to make a cold guess where you're just blindly looking at it, not even reading the question and just taking a guess. Don't do that if you can help it. There are circumstances where that may prove beneficial if you're running out of time, but that's really a last resort. Okay. So when you use process of elimination, you only want to use a single slash to cross off your answer choices. Don't do an X, okay? When you do an X, you're wasting time. So one single slash, and also do not cross off the entire answer. Only cross off the letter, okay? Because you're wasting time when you do that. When you cross, and then you can't, if you have a question about it later, you can't go back and actually read through it. Then you have to erase, and it just is not efficient for you. It's not productive for you. So just don't do it. Okay, and it also kind of wastes your energy and makes it harder for you to in the end. Okay, a single slash through the letters for your answer choice is sufficient. So I can't actually do the diagonal slash on my computer, so I just did kind of a strike through. So that works too. We have a question. Generally, the SAT is a paper test. It depends on what you've registered for. Did that answer your question? Okay. So we had a question just kind of about the formatting for the test. And again, it kind of depends, and the situation is kind of evolving because of COVID-19. So you kind of have to do whatever the testing center or whoever's administering the test to you will kind of provide you with instruction. So it's specific to what you've signed up to take. Generally speaking, I think the SAT is usually a paper test. So you actually have paper to cross it off. In the event that you don't, you should be given, like for like things like the GRE, which is a computer-based test, that's also similar to this. You would basically get scrap paper, and then you can do A, B, C, D, cross it off, A, B, C, D, E, or whatever it is, and cross it off for the multiple choice. So it's basically either way, you're still crossing off an answer choice, and you're just keeping track of it. It's just one is on scrap paper if you're doing it on a computer, or the other one is actually on the test itself. Okay. So you can apply POE to any of the paired passages or to really any of the passages. Okay. Narrowing your answer choices increases your probability of answering the question correctly, which is pretty basic logic. And it's also in your best interest to answer as many questions on the exam as possible. Okay. So, and if you want to know why, please revisit the section in chapters, it should be 1 to 2, somewhere in there from the textbook that discusses scoring, okay? Because that'll talk about the point alignment, okay? Allotment. All right, so then I want every student to determine, after you've kind of identified which passages you want to start with, and have kind of determined which subject matter it tends to be the most difficult for you. I want you to determine the question types that are most challenging for you and identify the ones that are the easiest for you. So that's going to vary. So after today's class and this week's kind of practice test, you should have a better idea about the types of questions you usually answer incorrectly. Okay. If it vary, you find that there isn't any kind of pattern in terms of the types of questions you get wrong, email me, let me know, and we can kind of discuss a different strategy for you. Okay. All right. So I want you to also, every student should go back through their practice test. So once you've done that, once you've done the identifying the different passages, you've identified which types of questions you get wrong most often. I want you to go back through practice test 1 and practice test 8, even though you've already done them. And I want you to identify the question types and examine your incorrect responses. So I want you to get in the habit of identifying the type of question that you're being asked. Okay. This is so that you can not only troubleshoot any questions that you consistently get wrong, but also to kind of help you with your game plan for approaching every passage. Okay. Or specific passages based on the subject matter. Okay. So that includes making a list of the types of questions you answered incorrectly and note whether your errors were the result of not reading carefully enough or paying enough attention to the text or questions, or if you rush, or if you or whether or not it's really that you don't understand the content or the question that's being asked. So if you're confused about that, you want to make a clear distinction of whether or not it's just a simple careless error, or just not being thorough enough, um, or attentive enough, versus whether or not it's a lack of comprehension of the actual content being addressed or being assessed, or what they're actually asking you to do. Okay. Because that's a critical difference in terms of how we approach it, and what we need to do to fix it so that you can get it right. Okay. You should identify your errors when you self-score your practice test. So I want you to identify what you got wrong, why you got it wrong. You should be thinking about that anytime you self-score. Don't just go through and say, I got that one wrong, I got this one wrong, and read the answer in the explanations that I give you. Okay. I want you to actually kind of go through the logic step by step of why did I get this one wrong? Because I'm not going to be able to be there side by side. Normally, in like a one-on-one tutorial, I would go through that with you, but I don't have the luxury of that in a group class like this. Okay, so it's your responsibility as a student to be able to go through and kind of assess what you're getting wrong, why you might be getting it wrong, and to ask questions or say, I can't resolve this on my own. I'm not sure what I'm doing. Okay. Okay, so if you're good with time, and some students will be, we had a question from the chat here. So do you think it would help if I checked my answers after every reading passage so the passage could be fresh in my mind and I can understand the answers better and why I got it wrong? In the context of taking the test, wait to check your answer, like to actually check your answers until you're done. Okay. The reason for that, I mean, I appreciate your attempt to try to go through and assess it, as you need to do these as two separate things, because you need to be in test taking mode, and you're going to be focused on finishing and getting through the questions for come test day. So you don't have the luxury of going through and like checking yourself. You can check yourself as you go, like checking your logic, like that's kind of what you do when you answer the questions anyway, or should be doing. But what you really want to kind of focus on is going into testing mode of, this is what I need to do step by step, following it, to answer all the questions. Once you've answered the questions for a section and you find you still have time, then you can go back and double check your answers for certain things. However, word of caution, typically your instinct on questions is the one you should go with. So if you if you're going back and second guessing, unless you're really unsure and you just took a guess and you know that you just did it, like you narrowed it down to 50-50 between one answer choice and another, or between three different answer choices, and you want to kind of reassess that, then go right ahead. But only at the very end, after you've finished your time, after you finish the actual test, because the key is you need to answer all the questions. Okay. Before you start doing checking. And I don't want you getting in the habit of doing that in your practice test where you're self-checking every single question, because if you do that, you're going to run out of time. Or you run the risk of running out of time, even if you haven't so far. And I don't want you to do that. Okay. Because you need to focus on separating, this is what I need to do to get through the test. This is what I do once I've actually finished the section and answered everything. Okay, so those are two separate tasks that you're really doing. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right, so getting back to what we were saying. So when you're going back through the practice test one, you want to make sure that you're identifying errors when you self-score your practice test, but that's something that you do after you've already taken the practice test. So I don't want you to do that while you're doing it, while you're actually taking the practice test and simulating the testing environment, okay? It's something that you should do after it as kind of revision, as kind of review about the questions when you're kind of going through and doing your self-score, okay, for each week. If there are specific question types that you aren't sure how to answer, please ask me in class or through email, okay? We can definitely create, like I can create time for us to review specific types or content areas in more depth as needed, but for the sake of trying to give you as much time to practice these tests as possible, I want us to get through as much material as we can, okay? So, but I'm happy to go through and troubleshoot specific types of questions. And we're gonna go through some of those question types today, okay? So the next thing that I wanted to kind of go over is how to approach the reading passages. So all of this is kind of preparation so that we can tackle and look at annotations and things that you need to do in the text when you approach it, okay? So how to approach the reading passages. So every student in this class should be doing the following. First, you need to make sure that you've memorized the instructions to the evidence-based reading test. So you only have to skim read through them for any changes before tackling the passage come test day, okay? This is critical because you're wasting time when you have to fully read through the questions for understanding, okay? Like the instructions, because chances are they're going to be the same, but as the ones that you've been practicing on, but sometimes they do like to throw a curveball at you here and there, okay? You also want to make sure that you're reading the introductory information for the passage. So that's that little blurb at the beginning of those reading sections in the reading test. The English test, the writing and language test doesn't really have those. So we're going to kind of continue focusing on the reading test here. So that read the introductory information. So it contains key information, as I've said before in previous classes, about the author, the context, and the subject matter. It also can include information like the title of the work and the information regarding the passage and its origins can be found there too. So if you're reading a translation, that's important for you to know if it's a translation and who's translating it versus and whether you're going to be dealing with, you have to keep it in your frame of reference when you're looking and reading through a text. Oh, this was written in a different language originally and it was translated, so it's this author's, this translator's interpretation of this author's work. So I have to keep that in the framework of what I'm thinking. So there are elements that you want, like it's important to be able to read that introductory information so that you can have as much context as possible to delve into the passage, okay? Um, and sometimes it can include things like central concepts. Sometimes it might actually be there in the title for you, or even in like a line afterwards of saying, this is what's happening. And I'll kind of show you an example of that. Should actually have been in, um, yeah, practice test 8 question, the first passage, which I'll show you in a second. So the third thing you need to do is read the passage and annotate as you read. Okay, so for reading, you need to read it at least once. Okay, so that's the passage. You need to read the passage at least once. So time permitting, and especially if you're a pretty quick reader, you want to read the passage twice. So the first time is ideally for understanding, and the second time is for a more critical reading. Okay, since you don't really have the luxury of doing a very close reading of the text as you would for like as some of the other reading strategies might recommend that you do when approaching a reading test. You want to focus on getting the kind of theme or the thesis or the general idea of what this passage is about. You need to know the gist so that you can address the questions, but you can focus on specific details from the questions to help kind of tailor where you're reading, which we're going to get into in a second. Okay. If you are not a quick reader, you want to aim to read only once. Okay, it is important to find the answers to the questions in the text or related infographic. It's more important to find the answers in the text or in the infographics than it is to spend too much time reading. No one should be spending too much time reading. Okay, and I'm gonna get into specific time amounts in just a second. If you're running out of time on any passage or are not a strong reader, another strategy you can kind of employ is to read the first few paragraphs for understanding and then only topic sentences and concluding sentences. If you want to check both topic and concluding sentences, just because sometimes they don't give you a clear topic sentence, or you are transitioning between ideas and need to know that in a concluding sentence. So you want to look at topic sentences and concluding sentences, as well as looking, like, you still want to annotate in the sections that you're reading using this particular strategy. And you want to read the last few paragraphs to ensure that you have a general understanding of the passage. So you're reading basically the first few paragraphs, the last few paragraphs, and each of the topic sentences and concluding sentences in the actual body of the text. Okay. Um, so that's to help give you a main, like an idea of what each paragraph is about, as well as what the everything together is about. Okay. And this is really a strategy you want to only really use if you are not a strong reader and or if you're consistently running out of time. Okay. You can especially use this on like the last passage if you were able to read through the rest of them, but I'm going to get into that in a second. Okay. Um, you may have to read sections while answering questions to get for a further information for each section, but you'll be doing a more focused reading in that case. And rather than having to read everything in a short amount of time. Like, so now you're going to be focused more on the specific sections that they want you to look at in the text and adjust your reading based on that. Does that make sense, everyone? Yeah. Okay. Quick question. Okay. This is a good question. So essentially, someone asked when we are taking the test is when we have to apply the strategies or after we are checking back. Also, how many strategies we have to apply during the test. All right. There are numerous strategies that you can apply. So depending on which ones you use is your own, what strategy works best for you, which is part of what we're doing here. We're trying to assess what methods work best for you. And it's very customized. So it's not going to work for everyone. But the strategies that I'm talking about in this section here are the ones that you want to like everyone should be focusing on. Okay, this is a good general strategy regardless of whether or not you're also doing things like SQ3R, or if you're also doing things like you're just skim reading the passages, or different things like that. Everyone should be following these strategies, which is why I said every student should do the following up at the top here. This is for how you're actually approaching the passage. Okay, so this is what you're doing for every single passage. So you need to, step one, once you've memorized the evidence-based reading, like the instructions, you don't have to memorize them again. Like, you don't have to keep memorizing them. You just need to remember what they were. And then just kind of briefly skim through each of the questions each time that you go through a section, just so that you have in case they throw anything at you that changes what you've memorized. Okay, or how you're supposed to approach a certain section. Okay. I don't foresee that happening very often, but it can happen. So I don't want you to be kind of surprised if it does happen. Okay, so that's kind of step one that you're going to be starting on at least this week, to be able to memorize that, to get yourself started. What you will be doing is really starting with skimming through those instructions. That's the first step, really, come test day, for each passage. And then you're reading through the introductory information. Okay, so that's the second thing that you do. That's really the first thing that you're going to be doing on each passage, subsequent passage. So it's really just the first one that you're dealing with the instructions, because that's the instructions for the entire section. Okay, the introductory information is for each passage. Okay, or paired passage. Okay, so everyone has to do that. You also have to read the passage, which is what we're going over now, and annotate as you read. Everyone should be doing this. It doesn't matter if you're being extremely detailed, like you don't need to do what you would do for a close reading, but you need to be able to do underlining, circling of, which we're going to get to. Okay. um okay, so you're reading the passage at least once. Okay, that's what everyone has to do. Okay, what I kind of added at the bottom here, that we've been going over, are some kind of information about strategies if you're not a quick reader, what to do if you're running out of time. So these are common issues that students face when reading the passage. And also for more, like for students who are better reader, who are faster readers, they can read twice and they'll get a better understanding. That's ideal, in a reading test, is to at least read it twice, to read it more than once and annotate in detail, do a very close reading. But you don't have the luxury of that time, in terms of time, unless you're a very fast reader and you can actually at least get the second reading through so that you can get a better idea of the text. Okay, that's not going to happen for everyone. Most students are going to only be able to read once. Okay, and everyone should try to read at least once, but I'm trying to give you tools so that you can approach a passage if you're running out of time or if you struggle with reading. Okay, of how to be able to then get to the questions, because the questions are what you're trying to do, what you have to do. Okay, on the test, that's your focus. So it's, you don't want to get bogged down by the reading. Okay. All right, so does that kind of answer a student's question? Yeah. Okay. um Continuing on. Okay, so here you have, you only have about 12 minutes to read each passage, and answer the questions related to the passage or passages. This time should grant you only a few minutes at the end to review your work and revisit any questions as needed. So that's where you're going to go back and do your checking. Okay, but it's at the very end of completing the section, the entire the reading test. Okay, because you're going to be stopping in between doing each section. Okay, the different sections of the test. Do not spend more than 5 minutes reading any passage. Okay, if you find yourself, like if you're reading through the first few sentences or paragraphs and do not understand it, finish doing, your kind of strategy for underlining, which I'm going to get to in the annotation section just below. Okay, and move on to the questions. Do not waste time reading for comprehension if you're not understanding it. Okay, the answers are in the text for you, so your time is better spent answering, like focusing on answering the questions and finding the answers based on the material that where they're directing you, than laboring over a particularly technical or tricky passage. For more advanced students, you might be like, but I love science, I need, like, I should know this. Don't get bogged down by that, because that's how they're going to trick you, because they want you to focus more on the reading. They want to distract you with the reading. They don't want you to get to the questions and figure out how to answer the questions and get it right and move on. Okay, so you want to keep the questions in your mind as your focus of the direction you're going through anytime you're approaching a reading section here. Okay. All right, so now I want to get into the annotations. So step one, so essentially once you've done your reading, while you're doing your reading, you're annotating. Okay, so as you go through, I'm going to go through what I mean by annotating. Okay, so you should not be spending more than the time allotted for reading to annotate the text. So in that 5 minutes that you have to read, so someone had a good question. Should we practice reading faster because I am personally a slow reader? You can try to, like, there are strategies you can employ to try to increase your reading speed. My my advice to you is to consistently, if you're a slow reader, that's fine, we can employ different strategies for you if you find that you're consistently running out of time or that you're not able to answer the questions. So email me and I can discuss that with you. But basically, you have a limited amount of time, especially if you're going to be taking the June exam. You don't have that much time to increase your reading speed, and increasing your reading speed and fluency takes time. And some people are just slower readers than others. That's just, everyone has their own pace and speed. If you don't do reading frequent, like the more you read, I think the generally the faster you read or can read, but that's not always the case. So don't worry so much about increasing your reading speed unless you are not consistently making it for that 12-minute increment per passage. If you're struggling with that, like then one of those types of strategies that I talked about that you can employ is that read the first few paragraphs, read each topic sentence and concluding sentence, read the last few paragraphs, and then use that and then approach the questions. You may not be answering, like it depends on your score goals too. Like if you are trying to get like a perfect score, then you do need to actually read everything more thoroughly. But if you're going for the schools that you're applying to are not requiring a perfect score, then you can you have kind of some flexibility in terms of what you can do and how many questions you can answer. It also depends on how many, like what questions you struggle with. If you struggle with particular question types, let's focus on answering those question types so that as soon as you can, if you're not getting through the reading, don't even worry about it. Go back to your questions and make them your focus. So we'll discuss that as we go, but I want to continue here. Okay, annotations. So do not spend more than the time allotted for reading to annotate the text. Do your annotations as you read. You need to circle proper nouns and numbers in the text. If you don't know what a proper noun is, please email me and we will need to have a grammar discussion. I know that there has been a request for more grammar discussion going forward, and I'm going to try to integrate that going forward, especially for the writing and language tests. But there is a lot of grammar to cover, and I want to really focus on getting you through the practice tests. So we may find an alternate solution if we can, okay? So circle proper nouns and numbers in the text. This is critical because you want to be able to find that information, and chances are if there's a proper noun in there or a number, you're going to be asked about it. So it makes it easier for you to find it. Underline key words, phrases, ideas, and information from the text as you read. Things that you think are important, things that you think might be asked of you in a question, or that you need to understand in order to understand the passage, okay? Like the main idea or things like that. Everyone should also be right. I'm going to give you examples of what you should be doing with an actual visual in just a few minutes. But I want you to write a keyword or phrase next to each paragraph to remind yourself about the main idea or topic addressed in that section. Keep the note as short as possible, but memorable, okay? So that you can draw your attention back to it and really trigger, oh, right, this is what this section was about. This is where I go to find information about cats. The first thing that came into my head. Okay, so at the top of the passage, you want to write a keyword or phrase that summarize the central concept, theme, claim, or thesis of the passage. Okay, so depending on what it is, it will, or what type of passage you're dealing with will vary depending on if it's a theme, if it's a claim, if it's a thesis, if it's a concept, all of that. But you want to kind of get an idea of what the central concept is, the binding thread of that whole text, and why they're having you look at that text, what that entire text is about. So, but keep it short, keep it memorable, okay? If you're not sure what the passage is addressing, move on to the questions and come back. Okay, because the questions are going to help directly. It's more important to get to the questions than to labor over the reading. Okay, you want to answer the easier questions first and then return to the questions related to the central concept, theme, thesis, claim, etc. You'll have a better understanding of the passage once you finish the more detail-oriented or words and context questions, okay? So those are kind of the first set of questions that you're going to tackle, which I'm going to go into in just a sec, okay? Time permitting, I mean, you want to actually address the easier questions first because it's going to give you more time to focus on the, like, then you've got more answered and you get, you have more time to be able to get to the rest of the section, to be able to get to the ones that you're not sure about. Okay, so time permitting, also label the question types to identify which questions you should answer first. I've kind of given you a list of code that I think you should use to help you not only identify the question type and what it's asking you, but also to help you then prioritize which questions work best for you, like what your questions you should be focusing on. Okay, and I'm going to get into what these question types are in just a second. You do not have to necessarily use the subtypes that I kind of have listed here throughout, but it is helpful in terms of like identifying the specific type of question, or kind of isolating within these more broad, like these broader categories, what you're looking at. All right. So they can be helpful in identifying specific question types and the order in which you should complete them in a given passage or paired passage. Memorize at least the main question types, which are in bold here, okay, and use them in your annotations, okay? I'm going to show you examples in just a moment. So the first one, D, for detail oriented, or also for kind of diction, because you're dealing with subtypes include vocabulary and context, which generally has to do with diction, like your word choice, okay? TD for subtypes, specific detail from the text or idea from the text. So again, it's just a different way of annotating, okay? But D for detail or D for diction will kind of clue you into the type of question you'll be asked. Inference, I for inference, okay? So that's asking you to infer information from the text, okay? ES, evidence support. T for, so that's dealing with things like textual support from the text, like line numbers, different things like that, or asking you to justify support, which we're going to get into in a sec. T for technique, so author's technique. DR for data reasoning. U for function or usage. A for analogy, R for relationship, or C for condition. BP meaning big picture, so you're looking at the global aspect, like the global view of a text rather than the minute detail. There are a lot of subtypes here for big picture, which is why I have subtypes too. So CC/T is for central concept, thesis, claim. All of those are kind of like if you're dealing with a central concept. To contrast that with MI for main idea, meaning main idea of a paragraph, whereas the main idea or central concept of a work as a whole is more of this first one, okay? Point of view is another one. Purpose and rhetorical strategy. Always start with the easier questions. Okay, so I want all of you to kind of go through and sort of memorize the ones that are in bold. If you want to, you can also use the ones that are in the subtypes, but which I actually encourage you to do, but you don't always have the luxury of that, of as much time to go through. It really doesn't take that much time, and it will help you kind of direct you with your approaching questions. Always start with easier questions. So for each question type, start with any questions that mention particular line numbers or sections in the text, as these will be the easiest to locate in the passage. So if they give the information to you of where to find the information in the text, start with those questions because you don't have to hunt for them. Okay? Rather than doing blind searching, which takes longer, focus on the ones that you can answer immediately and then get to the ones that are going to take more time. You want to give yourself as much extra time as you can in answering questions. Annotations are critical to give you extra time, and they can swiftly direct you to where to go for the passage so you can find it more quickly and move on faster. Okay. In general, I recommend following this order for approaching question types when you're answering the questions. So once you've done your reading, you've done your annotations, start with your detail-oriented questions, okay? Especially the ones that make, or any questions that make direct references to specific lines or sections of the text. Always start with those, okay? Detail-oriented, they're going to be giving you specific line numbers. So these are kind of things like vocabulary and context. So you have little picture or detail questions, so references to the text basically, or asking you to understand something in context for vocabulary or how it's being used, all right? Those are those types of questions. Inferencing questions, again, everything, all of these questions are going to be, especially if it's referencing specific lines or specific sections, okay? These types of questions, so inferencing should only ask you to make a small logical inference rather than more complex or abstract inferences. Evidence for the right conclusion is found in the text, you just have to look for it, okay? Evidence support questions is a newer type of question on the SAT, and they typically come after a detail-oriented or inference question that are related to this question, okay? So they're going to be based on your answers to previous questions, your response, okay? So we're gonna walk through and I'm gonna show you some of those, and they're pretty easy to identify based on their wording, okay? It requires successfully answering previous questions and being able to defend your answer choices with reasoning, logic, and evidence from the passage, okay? It's pretty straightforward. Author technique questions. So those are dealing with things like tone, like for instance, why, like how the author is using tone, or explaining, rationalizing why they're making a particular choice, okay? Data reasoning questions, especially those with, okay, so you have often the SAT is going to ask you to assess the author's use of logic and reasoning to ensure that you can interpret data correctly and identify other people's factual errors. So this is another kind of question you're going to see. These tend to be focused on the infographics, okay, and incorporating information from an infographic into relevant information in the text, okay? They're also pretty easy to identify. So they can include things like errors in interpretation, judgment, synthesis of data and ideas, and you can be asked to explain, assess, or justify how the author made an error in interpreting or in analyzing the data. Some can also include things that are related to the data, okay? Function usage questions. So those are going to be things like what the purpose, the rationale as a writer, why the author chose to use certain things, what the purpose of particular words or phrases or sections are in terms of structuring the author's argument, okay? Or in terms of like what the function is or what the usage is. So those types of questions. Analogy questions. So these are things that you're comparing things mainly. Like generally the big ones that you're going to be seeing are things like relationships or like circumstances, or what was the word I used up here? Condition. Yeah. And then, so those are going to be things, these are questions for the analogy that you're going to be requiring comparing conditions and or relationships in the passage with similar circumstances or relationships not mentioned in the passage. So they're going to ask you to kind of, in a way, you're sort of inferring data. You're kind of making parallels. You're making conclusions based on the text about relationships or conditions. It also requires identifying hypothetical situations with the events, conditions, or relationships in the passage. So those types of questions are pretty easy to identify too. Big picture questions. They're dealing with point of view of the author, purpose of the passage. It could also be point of view of characters or other like elements of the story or of the text, depending on what type of text it is. Purpose of the passage, or the purpose, like the overarching purpose. So what's the purpose in writing? Is it to inform? Is it to describe? Is it to persuade, etc.? Also, purpose of what's the author trying to achieve? What's their message? What's their goal? Their, like, those types of things. Rhetorical strategy of the author. So what techniques, rhetorical strategies, what techniques and methods are they using in their argument? So what's their argument look like? What does, like, are they using things like logos, which is logic and reasoning? Are they using things like pathos, which or ethos? Okay, if you don't know what those terms are, you've probably heard of things like emotional appeals, or kind of dealing with, is it like morally feasible, like different things like that, different aspects of elements of argumentative writing, essentially. Okay, or any type of writing, really, in terms of justifying or the strategies that you use to construct an argument. Okay, so it has more to do with, like, um, the actual structure and the techniques employed by the author to convey their message. Okay. Timing. At the end of the questions for each passage or paired passage, check your time so you know how much time you have left for the reading test and whether you need to adjust your strategy to finish the section. So this is where, if you've made it through the 3 of the passages and you still have the paired passage and the another single passage, you might want to do the strategy where you're starting with reading the first few paragraphs, the last few paragraphs, and the topic sentences in order to finish on time if you're really running out of time. So that's where you would kind of adapt based on your timing, and why timing is so critical, because it allows you to adjust based on your needs or particular circumstances in the test. Once you finish answering the questions for the entire reading test, you should have a few minutes, about 3 minutes roughly, to revisit any questions and you need to revise or reassess, but trust your instinct on the questions as much as possible. Okay, because chances are you're right. If you do not have time to make as educated a guess as possible using process of elimination, finish answering the questions finish the questions in a given section and select a letter choice. Just pick a random letter, but stick with that letter for making any educated, like any last minute kind of throwing to the wind type of guess, where you don't have time to necessarily get it down to a 50-50 chance of getting it right, which is more ideal, and making an educated guess. If this is really just kind of like a cold guess of, like, I don't have time to even read the questions, I'm just going to stick with this answer choice A, B, like stick with one letter for the entire rest of the exam. So choose a letter for the day and move on, because you're going to get yourself confused if you start like picking other letters, if that's the kind of situation that you find yourself in. All right. So here, reading test content. So the SAT is kind of going over reading test content in terms of information and ideas, rhetoric, and synthesis. These are what they call content areas, but they're really they're more dealing with, like, what they're testing you on. So they're not really, they're more cognitive skills than they are specific like subject content. Okay. So generally speaking, detail question, like information ideas questions, tend to be the most straightforward, with synthesis questions being harder because it's a different cognitive skill. It's a more complex cognitive skill. You're dealing with it on a different level in your mind. So in terms of your understanding of knowledge and interpretation, application of knowledge. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. The good news, though, is that all the information you need to answer these questions, regardless of the type, the content section, is in the passages. So always refer back to the passages for your answers. You just need to learn how to identify them and find the clues that will lead you to the answer. So this is just kind of going into a little bit more detail about the types that I mentioned before, which was on my last handout to everyone. So I want to kind of look quickly at practice test 8.
I am going to go through specific question types in just a moment, and then I want us to look at the writing test a bit here. So you have in that document that I gave you that we were going over just a few minutes, there is a section about the writing test. I'm not going to read through that with you right now. The writing test is harder to pin down in terms of specific question types. Mostly and like the information kind of varies depending on editorial choices that you need to make, or what the text is asking you in terms of understanding the content and the grammar. So those are more like editorial and stylistic changes that can vary. So there are tons of different options in terms of your interpretation, like what you could be asked on the writing and language test. So the best way that you can kind of prepare is know that they're really testing your editorial skills, and they're really testing your understanding of language and grammar, including punctuation. Okay. So this is an example practice test 8 that I did. So up here is kind of my overarching idea of what this passage is about. Kind of the section that I had mentioned before where they're giving you key information is here, where they say the narrator or writer recalls his childhood in early 20th century Barcelona. I tend to do a lot of underlining. You don't quite have to underline as much, but everyone should be underlining and circling. The reason for that is because it's going to draw your attention back to it. Okay. I as a reader just tend to do a lot of annotation in general. So this is a bit more defined than I would expect your work to be, but I think that you want to aim for something like this. Okay. So I kind of give a summary. Loves reading, writing in the first sentence. I also recommend underlining topic sentences and concluding sentences just as a general practice, because it's going to tell you a lot of information about what that paragraph's about, and so you might not even need to read the entire paragraph to really understand what's going on in it if they give you a good topic sentence. Okay. So loves reading, no books allowed for the second kind of in this section where he's talking about like his father, hates, disapproves books, reading, hardships, so kind of hard times, different world generation views. I've circled things like Christmas in Pere, and Charles Dickens, Great Expectations. I should have circled Sampere and Sons, and actually I did. And then it's just not showing up there. And then circling numbers. I underlined kind of key phrases here. I noted where it was shifting focus. I kind of identified that this is talking about his sanctuary and support, which is very different from the first kind of beginning. Christmas gift, like main ideas here. We're going for breadcrumbs basically to help you get to the right answers. Do these kinds of annotations make sense to everyone so far, what I'm talking about in terms of underlining and circling and noting? Okay. All right. I also noted in this one that it's a translation because that's important data. All right. Here, first question. Over the course of the passage, the main focus shifts. So this is a big picture question. You're dealing with a central concept or thesis dealing with this whole section, okay? And I also indicated that it's technique because it's referring to the author's technique. So what they actually did. You'll note that I did the slashes, single slashes. Yeah, primarily. So this isn't, when you do a close reading, you're doing a lot more in-depth annotation in terms of like making a question or asking questions of the text in the margin, different things like that. But annotation for the SAT is primarily underlining and circling, as well as doing the keywords for each paragraph, and doing things like underlining topic sentences, concluding sentences. It's very straightforward. And looking for keywords and ideas in the passage that are going to clue you into things that they're going to ask you about. Okay. Um, you also have the main idea up at the top here, which I had right here. Since this was the first one, I couldn't do it directly above it, but it kind of he loves reading and writing, which leads to inspiring his career as an author. That's the main idea in this text. Okay, so you have big picture questions. So these, you can kind of see my coding of the questions. So the coding of the questions is really going to be focusing on the questions. Okay, so you're doing that as part of your annotation as you go, but you should do it before you approach any of the questions. Okay, so once you do your reading and your annotations with the underlining, etc., you need to basically look at the questions quickly and go through and identify what they are. Or you can do it as you go. But I think it's more efficient to be able to identify all of them and then go back and prioritize and do that order that I was recommending, where you're tackling the detail-oriented questions. So you would deal with a question like number 5, where it's saying reasonably be inferred. This is dealing with, it involves a text detail, which is why I have the TD here. So it's a detail kind of question, but it also is inference. So you want to wait until and see if there are any questions that are just focused on text detail. So like this one, the narrator indicates that he pays Simpere. That's very detail oriented, very quick. You can find it in the passage. It's actually up here. So he pays, I'd leave the coins, I'd manage. It was only small change, right? So that's kind of what he's talking about. So those types of things you want to then, once you kind of code it your questions, you want to go back and address them in the order that's best for you, which is the one that I kind of had just gone over with the coding, starting with detail questions, kind of moving on to things like inferencing. And focusing on ones that are actually mentioning, like in number 2, it's a main purpose question, which is one of the questions you want to do last because it's a big picture question. But it is including a direct reference to 1 to 10. So you want to do this question before tackling another main purpose question that doesn't include line numbers, because the line numbers one's going to be done faster. Does that make sense? Okay. I have which choice provides the best evidence for answer to the previous question. You have VIC for vocabulary and context, and also usage. So I should have actually underlined, I normally would underline the word used in line 44. Let's see if I have an example. Yeah. So in the next passage, on number 12, I normally would underline used, line 21, allows, means, because the underline in the questions too, and circle in the questions too, as you read through them, because that's going to help clue you into what you need to focus on, okay, when you get back there. Line 21, allows, means, and then find it. So you'll see that many of the questions are going to be multiple types, okay, because this is dealing with a text detail because it's referencing a line number, and a detail from like an actual word used in the passage. So it's dealing with usage in general in terms of the author's choice to use this particular word over another. And it's dealing with vocabulary and context in terms of what is the most appropriate word given the context in the sentence. Does that make sense to everyone? Let's see. So this one, question 18, for the second, I believe it's the second passage. The last paragraph serves mainly to, you have main idea, and it's also using a usage question. So what is the use, the function of the last paragraph is what you're looking at, and it's dealing with the main idea that it's trying to convey. Okay. Um, you can see too this pattern of you have an inferencing question or a detail question, like inferencing question, followed by an evidence support question. Okay, which goes provides the best evidence for answer to the previous question. So that's your clue. Lights should be going off, sounds, alarms should be going off in your mind when you see which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question. That's like yes, it's the evidence support. It's requiring you to understand that what the previous question or questions were talking about, and then apply it, that what you used your logic for that to answering this question. Okay, they're pretty easy to identify. Sometimes the inferencing questions will directly say that they're going to infer, like I think that first example we looked at, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they might just say suggests, or kind of like this one is in 16 is inferencing because you have which of the following hypothetical situations would Malhotra most strongly object. You have to infer based on your understanding of this character, this person, and the knowledge, the information you've gained from the text from this person. You can't make that without that knowledge. And the inferencing questions aren't going to ask you to make huge leaps. These are going to be kind of logical conclusions, kind of very straightforward. Um, the data response, which of the following statements is supported by the graph? If you're dealing with things that are like supported by the graph, supported by the chart, those are all data response questions, because they're going to be focusing on you interpreting the data or assessing the author's interpretation of the data, and things like that. It's also an inference because you have to infer a conclusion, kind of. So here you have to kind of deduce what the conclusion would be, based on the information given to you. Does this kind of coding system make sense to people? And if anyone has any questions about what we went over today, do let me know through email, and we can kind of go into them in more detail. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a great week, and I'll send out your homework later. Okay. Bye.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and please remember to contact us at info@embracetutoring.com to set up any personalized private tutoring sessions you would like. Stay tuned for future videos, and best of luck with your studies. We definitely encourage you to visit our Instagram as well as TikTok pages if you have any questions along the way. Take care, guys. Best of luck with your studies.